Okay, friends, we go on. We're at Esoteric Astrology Adventure, number 140B, and we've been talking about the invocative sound that arises from each cross as a transition is being prepared to move on to the next cross. And it's only when there comes a fulfillment of all the arms of a particular cross that transition in consciousness can be made from one cross to another. So this is so important, only when the full influence of all the four arms of each cross has produced an effect in the subject is transition in consciousness made from one cross to another. So this is, we talked about crosses as spheres of influence. Completion is required, and let's see, here we have to be rounded out with respect to each cross. That's what we must do. Okay. Okay. When the time of transition from the mutable cross onto the fixed cross arrives, three things occur. And remember how important Pisces is as a sign of transition of Pisces. As a sign of transition, not only from the mutable to the fixed cross, but even later from the fixed cross to the cardinal cross. So three things occur here at the time of transition. Of course, it's very timely, isn't it? Because so many human beings at this time are being prepared to make a transition from the mutable cross to the fixed cross. After all, the first initiation of humanity, or a certain portion of it, is imminent, and that is equivalent to the transition. In fact, as people are preparing for that first initiation, they are, according to the Tibetan, in a sense, on the fixed cross already. It's a little difficult to make an arbitrary line and say, take the first initiation, join the first cross, enter the kingdom of God. Those three things do go together, but there are these overlap periods, as I have been trying to explain, and perhaps a number of the people that we are dealing with in our astrological consultations will be in this overlap period. The thing is, to try to know oneself well enough to know where one really stands within the group and within the whole, and we see the Leo-Aquarius axis operating there. Self-knowledge with considerable completeness is not easily achieved. But by using Libra and comparing oneself, not in any egoistic way, but simply in an objective way, with other people in the world and what they're doing, and people who may be on your ray and what they're doing and so forth, we can come to a pretty fair idea of where we stand and what we have to do. Okay, so moving on. Three things occur. Excuse me. One, the influence of the four energies of the mutable cross have brought about a vast experience of life and form. And so many people who were individualized 21 million years ago, so many of those individualized on Earth are still on the mutable cross. So it is vast. So it's, let's just say, millions of years of life and form. It's a long time compared to the amount of time that one spends on the fixed cross, the cross of shortest duration, just as the duration of the tenure of the Bodhisattva is the shortest when compared to that of the Mahachohan and the Manu. So a vast experience of life and form. There is now a gradually growing and profound dissatisfaction awakening in the consciousness of man, making the transition. However many thousands or millions that might be. He has exhausted material desire to a very great extent. The objects which are achieved through the pursuit of desire are found to be wanting. They do not satisfy the spirit. He has exhausted material desire to a very great extent and is no longer attracted to the path of outgoing into matter. He is no longer spiritually extroverted, however outgoing his personality may appear to be. The needs of the physical nature no longer dominate him. He is afraid of the impulses emanating from the astral plane. He is awake and active mentally and as a functioning personality, but he remains unsatisfied and is uncomfortably aware of it. The great dissatisfaction which occurs in the second ray integration formula, and more people coming under that ray, is involved here. A kind of detachment from many objects of desire. So this, as the Tibetan is often considered by the psychologist, as a problem, but in fact is an indication of a certain achievement. We also have the prominence of Neptune with its divine discontent. The spirit always wants more until it finds itself and re-becomes itself. And then he turns to invocation. This process of invocation falls into two stages. So the stage of aspiration, irregular and vague, but gradually assuming power. So this is reaching out in prayer and voice to something higher. And then the stage of mysticism, merging into occultism, the study of that which is hidden. It's very simple, isn't it, what occultism really is? It's the study of all factors hidden, and especially of hidden causes and of hidden values. Presently hidden energies which must be made known, integrated and utilized. Duality is now consciously and uncomfortably recognized, and the higher way and the spiritual vision is contacted. Well, all of this is going on before the first initiation, isn't it? Desire gives place to the vague promptings of what might be called love. This is the movement in the personality of that divine emerging aspect, especially on our planet with the second ray soul, isn't it so? And in our solar system. It is this that he seeks to invoke. When this is adequately strong, then true evocation takes place, and the disciple, for such a man now is, mounts the fixed cross. So this is what discipleship is. Desire gives place to the vague promptings of what might be called love. So this is psychologically how to mount the fixed cross. It's not so technical. It simply tells us what has to be going on with sufficient strength of invocation to produce an evocation of love. An evocation of love must be produced by sufficiently strong invocation. So we see that the fifth petal is a petal of duality, first perhaps of egotistical unity, but then of the discomfort when that proves wanting, and then the conflict between the two directions. And finally, the stage of aspiration is reached, and even mysticism, yes, as we move into the sixth petal and the first degree. I suppose quite a number of first-degree people are mystics at first. It depends upon the ray, but they certainly do tend to separate the divine from the mundane, as if they are two very different things, and this is, in a way, the attitude of the mystic. So, what have we here in summation? There's been a great deal of experience. There's a great emerging dissatisfaction, and in answer to this dissatisfaction, the individual turns to invocation, which at first is spotty and irregular, as an aspiration, and then a life of dedicated aspiration or more consistent aspiration, the life of mysticism, which gradually merges into occultism, which is a real study of the factors before that had simply been felt. So we move from feeling to sight when moving from mysticism to occultism. And it's it's the transition in one way from Uranus to from Neptune to Uranus. It's this discomfort, this dissonance that the man has to be rid of. It is felt as a cognitive dissonance. Dissonance, and dissonance, we know, is that which has to be resolved, otherwise it tears the form apart. The healer knows the place where dissonance is found. He also knows the power of sound and the sound which must be heard. So this is the beginning of the fourth stanza for healing, and the healer has the objective of resolving the dissonance in the right way. It doesn't always bring healing to the form, but it can bring liberation to the spirit. So this is what is happening as one prepares to move onto the fixed cross. One passes through a stage of mysticism. So the above is true of the individual disciple and also today of humanity as a whole. As I have oft told you, it is this process of invocation which is taking place in the human family. Well, we could call it prayer, we could call it upreaching, we could call it a call, a cry, many things we could call it. Prayer, upreaching, call, cry. The cry is pretty much from the solar plexus, and it is an appeal. The child cries and evokes the attention of the parent. And there is an analogy here to the parental part of ourself, our higher nature. So this invocation produces the present dire crisis. And the two stages above outlined are present today in a general and potent sense in mankind. So certainly at the minimally, humankind, well, that's the human kingdom, so humanity, let us say, is the world aspirant. And even at times called the world disciple, as if its mental consciousness had been sufficiently focused to persistently seek the light with regularity and without excessive emotion. Well, there are all types of human beings. Minimally, humanity is the world aspirant. In its higher brackets, it is the world disciple, and its higher brackets, it will become the world initiate. It will become the initiate of the first degree. The masters know the possible numbers, but apparently there are sufficient numbers to leaven the entire loaf, as it were, to lift the human race up considerably, as will be the case when the initiatory energies enter some of its members and are distributed to others. It was the recognition of these two stages in humanity which led me, under instruction from hierarchy, to give out at widely separated points in time 2 stanzas of a great occult mantram. So, under instructions from the hierarchy, instructions from his master, probably his master Kuthumi, and instructions from the Christ, permission granted, I suppose, by Sanat Kumara, who, yes, very definitely, he is involved in this. The but at the time that this is being written, the last stanza, which I think required maybe the greatest permission, was not yet given out. The first stanza, used in 1936, referred to the vague general aspiration of the mass of people in the world, which is today more pronounced than ever before and becoming more focused towards true well-being. So this part of the text was written after 1936, and if he talks about the second stanza, if it's been given out, it was written after 1940. I'm beginning to see the implications that the book is written earliest from the middle 30s, maybe from the later 30s, and somewhat in the early 1940s, it would appear, before 1942. We have gathered before 1942. But it's a long book. The Great Invocation, let the forces of light bring illumination to mankind. Let the spirit of peace be spread abroad. May men of goodwill everywhere meet in a spirit of cooperation. May forgiveness on the part of all men be the keynote at this time. Let power attend the efforts of the great ones, so let it be, and help us to do our part. There is an analysis of this in the Discipleship in the New Age Volume 2 book. So we can go there if we wish. He really does talk about the high level of the forces of light, and the spirit of peace is really an extraplanetary being. I used to think it was a shambolic being, like the but it is more extraplanetary, as is the avatar of synthesis, though intrasystemic, I suspect, within our solar system, but extraplanetary. So this was the 1936 attempt. It was a strong year for the second ray to offset the possibility of the war, but it could not penetrate the furious onslaught of the Black Lodge as it had dominated the German psyche. So it mobilized many but could not avert the war. Let power attend the efforts of the great ones. So let it be, and help us to do our part. The use of this first stanza was immediately successful and met with full response from those good and well-meaning people whose focus is predominantly astral and aspirational, and whose aim is peace and quiet. The peace and quiet provides the area of consciousness in which aspiration can flourish, physical and emotional comfort can be attained, and the recognition of the mystical vision becomes possible. So this stanza appealed to the mystics. The good, the well-meaning, the aspirational, but not so much to disciples who could see maybe, well, I'm sure it appealed to them, but the next stanza appealed to their ability to see the larger picture. The second stanza was given out later and was intended to be a test and a decision point in a time of crisis. So, definitely, this section of the book was written after 1940. So we do find parts of the Esoteric Astrology book being written in the 40s, apparently, but before 1942. And it would have taken quite a bit of work to do those first 400 or so pages, which are about the signs of the zodiac. So I'm sure the 1930s were involved. We're pinpointing it, but as I say, if you want to know more exactly, you can speak to Keith Bailey, as I think he has the record on that. So the second stanza, appealing in the midst of war, really, not before the war, not appealing to hope that there would be no war, but in the very midst of the onslaught. Let the lords of liberation issue forth. Let them bring succor to the sons of men. Let the rider from the secret place come forth, and coming save. Come forth, O mighty one. Let the souls of men awaken to the light, and may they stand with massed intent. Let the fiat of the Lord go forth. The end of woe has come. Come forth, O mighty one. The hour of service of the saving force has now arrived. Let light and love and power and death fulfill the purpose of the coming one. The will to save is here. The love to carry forth the work is widely spread abroad. The activate of all who know the truth is also here. Come forth, O mighty one, and blend these three. Construct a great defending wall. And the rule of evil now must end. Some of you, if you're interested in these set to music, I have set the Great Invocations to music, and they can be acquired in one little CD, both in choir form and some of them in solo form with a fine baritone. Well, we can see the appeal to the will. The coming one, the rider on the white horse, the Christ, the avatar, will come forth. And sometimes it seems that one is even invoking Sanat Kumara here. The Lord could seem to be Sanat Kumara. But the Christ, in a way, is the mighty one, but he is the Lord of love. He is to be supported by the first, second, and third ray, but he's rarely referred to as the mighty one, even though he is. So it seems the appeal is also to great first-ray beings. The Lords of Liberation did issue forth, at least one of them issued forth. This invocation must have been very successful in a certain respect. I mean, DK tells us he may not tell us in what manner the great tragedy was averted, but one of the Lords of Liberation did respond. And you do wonder whether the intense use of this invocation, appealing to them directly, did not have some potent effect when added to the desperate appeal of humans who were subject to the ravages of war. So the rider is certainly the Christ, and he is the Savior, and in a way he is the mighty one, the one who takes action whenever there is a withering of the law and an uprising of lawlessness on all sides. Then I manifest myself from age to age for the salvation of such as do good and the destruction of those who do evil. It's worded in various ways, and I'm somewhat paraphrasing there towards the end, but the one who comes forth, the Christ, since he is, well, he was, maybe he still is, the leader and the general commander of the forces of light. He is, he had a great role during that war. So, you know, he was a military leader in a way without being military. And the army was a great army of light and love, not a conventional army. And he was the leader of that. So in a way, he would be a mighty one, of course. But there also seems to be an appeal to the first ray, to the Lords of Liberation on the first ray, and even to Sanat Kumara on the first ray. The saving force, as it is discussed, is a threefold force, and involves light, love, and power, and it involves the three planetary centers, humanity, hierarchy, and Shambhala. But this is an invocation to a power needed to offset the attack of the forces of darkness. The end of the age, the power of Pluto, as we have been studying, the power of Scorpio and of Pluto bringing death to old forms of thought, is here suggested. It's not just enough light, love, and power, but there must be a death to the old decaying Piscean civilization. Pluto, the lord of death and hierarchical and esoteric ruler of the age of Pisces, now coming to an end. Fulfill the purpose of the coming one, who is the Christ. And we have here the three the three aspects of a great force. There is will. It's the will to save. The greatest of the world's saviors is actually Sanakumara, and the Christ reflects him. The love and the persistence to carry forth the work is in sufficient intensity to make the objectives of this invocation possible. And the goodwill, the active aid of all those who know the truth is also here. So the one who comes forth, I guess we have to call it the Christ here, he is a mighty one as the leader of that great army. Come forth and blend these three, the will to save, the love to carry forth the work, the active aid of those who know the truth. Christ blend these. Construct a great defending wall. We're told of the hierarchy and how it does protect humanity inasmuch as the law allows, and certainly those who are preparing for the reappearance of the Christ, we're told, are protected. Master Morya said, you will be amazed later when you see how we protected you. It is a great fiat, it's a first-rate word of power, the rule of evil, but that is what it was. As DK talks about it, Hitler and his evil gang, the rule of evil now must end with a great emphasis upon the word now. The three aspects of divinity are emphasized: will, love, and activity, and the nowness of their effectiveness. So let's see what he says. It was offered under this test to the masses, but was intended primarily for the use of those aspirants and disciples who are not only mystics, but who have made at least some small progress in their attempt to tread the occult way. So it was offered for them, and it was they who had to use this with understanding, intensity, and power. The masses would not so much know what it was all about, and even today, those who are strictly humanists and do not think of the higher nature of divine, they make man the measure of all things, and the preservation of the form is for them of highest value. It can get in the way, and in those days the pacifist idealists, for whom peace at all price, at any price, was the main objective, they did get in the way. And I wonder whether today the people who do not see the issues clearly, do not see the great challenge which is occurring to some of the highest human values, whether they too are not getting in the way of a resolution which may take some drastic action, because I do believe that humanity will have to stand up for what was so hardly won over the centuries: the freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. Humanity will have to stand up and say, look, this is what we've achieved, and this is what we retain. So the people who could really use this invocation, they are mentally focused in their attitude. The higher way is recognized by them. The vision has been seen, and they are now ready for something closer and more real. In other words, they are the true disciples. The last stanza is given primarily, therefore, and so far it was the last stanza, so it had to have been after 1940 and or in 1940, and before the end of 1942, as the decision there had not yet been really presented to humanity, and the late 30s were required for all that writing. So I think we're closing in on when this book was written. After a treatise on cosmic fire, I suppose a treatise on white magic had to be written. I think that was the next one. And then had to come Esoteric Psychology 1 and 2. So in a combined sense, you know, they amounted to more than 1,000 pages. That's a lot of writing. And it was only then that the writing could occur for esoteric astrology. All of these were given out in installments, as we know, and later gathered together as books. So the last stanza, meaning stanza 2, given, is primarily therefore for the use of those who have mounted or are in process of mounting the fixed cross. Hence it was not so popular. And even today, some people have a recoil against using it because it calls for death. And it is to the assertion of power. Sometimes, you know, people sign their letters light and love, you know, and I met a man, 20 years ago, who always had light, love, and power, and it struck me as being an effective way to set the seal upon what was meant, if it was, let's say, a serious letter. We should be reminded of the power aspect, the power of spiritual will, the power which ensures that something will be carried through. So many people are on the second aspect of divinity strongly. That is the strongest aspect, of course, and it is emerging, but they shy away from the exercise of the power aspect, and that's why I feel that light, love, and power should resound as a method of signing letters which are written to those in the esoteric field. Not always. One has to use one's judgment, and we do sometimes use the abbreviation LL and P. It doesn't carry quite the force, but it reminds. Anyway, that's a little aside, talking about the use of the first aspect when we are dealing with each other, and whether we can accept the importance of it. I mean, D.K. did say that the disciples of Shambhala are so often hated by those who do not understand why they do as they do. So it is for this reason that the use of the second part of the Great Invocation was relatively limited. He's not saying it was ineffective. It may still have been effective. It was repudiated almost violently sometimes by the emotional type of person who could see no further than the beauty of peace, the goal of expression upon the astral plane. So in this case, emotion blinded. Their vision of the greater whole and of the evocation of the will to good, which is not the will to peace, was exceedingly limited, and this through no fault of their own. It simply indicated their place upon the ladder of evolution and marked a relatively useful point of service, but one which is in the process of being transcended. So the first stanza appealed more to the emotions and to aspiration and to beautiful Neptunian visions of peace, and the third stanza brought in the power of Pluto and of Uranus, more occult planets, more drastic in their effect. So the will to good, he tells us, is not the will to peace. When the good descends, what we call peace, especially as appreciated by the emotional type and in relation to the astral plane, may be disrupted. Exceedingly limited, but he's not blaming, okay? Later he sometimes does take the idealists to task if they have no practical expression of their idealism, and if their idealism prevents practical expression. The people in the world today are coming to realize through suffering and its consequent reflection. I suppose, can he mean reflection upon the suffering, or reflection into life, that there is something greater than peace in the limited astral emotional sense. Peace is a great state which exists within Shambhala, so the peace of Shambhala is highly to be desired, but is not the same thing as the quiescent, undisturbed peace of the astral plane, and which is sought by the emotional type. The peace in the world today, people in the world today are coming to realize through suffering and its consequent reflection that there is reflection in their consciousness, I suppose, and affecting their behavior, that there is something greater than peace, and that is the good of the whole, not just the individual. And that is the good of the whole, not just the individual, peaceful conditions or national peace. Not just the individual. Not just peaceful conditions or even national peace. The will to good, the good of the whole, and this, of course, requires a great perspective. How can we know what is the good of the whole? We know so little about the people and the nations which constitute the whole, but there are certain high principles which we know are always good, and if they are preserved, and even if we don't know the details about those who make up the whole, we know that the whole will be served. This reorientation of human consciousness is brought about by the determined attitude of the souls of men, massed and blended, organized and focused by the vision of the general welfare of humanity. So we have Vulcan and Uranus, the first ray and the seventh ray. They are organized, but they stand with massed intent, and they are determined, even as Taurus, by which Vulcan is ruled, has determination. So the spiritual will, in some small measure, is coming through in the determined attitude. And they are gathered together and focused as one. They are, in a way, compressed. They are massed together. They are guarding their energy and are not dissipating it. So that massing effect, the compression of the massing effect is Vulcanian. And increasingly that planet is of real importance. So those who are living as disciples, living increasingly as souls, those who can come together as souls and blend and be massed, we might say, in the new group of world servers, those who can organize their efforts and focus their efforts by a great vision of human possibility for the general welfare of humanity, these people can be effective at that time and also at this time. It was, however, essential that these distinctions in attitude should appear in their clarity, and therefore we gave out the two stanzas of the Great Invocation separately and at different times. We do learn so much by contrast. It's the Mercurian and Geminian method, so the mind is sharpened when the contrasts are realized. So this 1936 and 1940, The distinction was not blurred, and of course by 1940 the war was in full swing in certain areas of the world. The invasions were occurring, and the will was required, not just vague aspiration and hope for a better condition. One had to fight fire with fire. You learnt thereby the difference of attitude between the mass of well-meaning people in the world and those people, largely who have 2.5 petals open. How are they called? They are called lotuses of passion and desire, and they contain the bulk of the well-meaning and good people of the world. And the contrast then between the correctly oriented attitudes of the intelligent aspirants and disciples. I guess there are some aspirants who are not intelligent. He qualifies the word. So, here we have, they are on the, quote, cross of right direction. And they are properly oriented, and they are mentally focused, and they realize the larger values, and that, as the Tibetan said, there are greater disasters that can befall a man than physical death. So this was necessary before wider action could later take place. The will of some of those who could respond had to be mobilized. I would pause here to remind you that both groups are necessary. The first group, emotional and idealistic, have a part to play in focusing the mass fluid aspiration. So we cannot do without the many men and women who are idealistically inclined and who are not thinking through the matter too carefully, but at least who desire the good and aspire towards the good. Their responsibility is to the general public. The other group of trained thinkers and people who are animated primarily by the will to good, which is of more importance in this world cycle than the will to peace, have a function to carry out in evoking hierarchical response in reply to the aspiration of the first group. So the first group aspires, but the response to the first group will necessarily have to come if the movement towards the will to good is strengthened by those who are trained thinkers and people who are animated primarily by this will to good. So they somehow manage to evoke hierarchical response, and that could the invocation would not be at a sufficient level if the invocative powers of the trained thinkers and those animated by the will to good were not supplied along with the invocation of the well-meaning emotional idealists. So these trained ones focus this aspiration on the mental plane, create a thought form embodying the objective, and project the call, which may reach the ears of the lords of liberation. Well, fortunately it did, or our planet would be in dire peril and stress at this time, and the plan of the planetary logos would be badly delayed. So the aspirational, emotional, idealistic call cannot reach the ears of the lords of liberation. But those who focus on the mental plane, because the lords of liberation can in a way descend no lower, those who focus on the mental plane and carry the thought form embodying a truer objective, project the call. There's an aspect of the Antikarana there, and that call may reach the ears of the lords of liberation, and in fact it did, in a most mysterious intervention which basically saved humanity from a terrible fate under the hateful and cruel energies of the Black Lodge. Okay. The blended invocation and united call from the different levels of the human consciousness will bring a mighty appeal to bear upon the hidden centers of the saving force. Will bring a mighty appeal to bear. This was happening at the time the war was even in its beginning phases. It is this united appeal which you must now organize. Thus the mass of humanity will be stimulated to move off the mutable cross and onto the fixed cross, and the new world cycle beginning in Aquarius, one arm of the fixed cross, will be definitely inaugurated by humanity itself, not simply something descending constellationally and from stellar sources, but humanity will create such an invocation that the evocation of the Aquarian energies cannot possibly be held off or delayed. So it's often the function of disciples to take that which is inchoate in humanity but is still of good value and organize it. Take the inchoate good and organize it. Now, there were great hopes at that time, goodness, that the mass of humanity would move off the mutable cross and onto the fixed cross of true aspiration, true seeking for the soul. Has this happened? Has this indeed happened? I'm in capitals. I'm still in capitals. Sometimes when you look around at the masses as they are demonstrating in the different countries and as they are subjected to injustices in various countries, you wonder, have they moved off the mutable cross? I guess it's a question of transition. The possibility of transition is there, but can it be that the greater part of humanity will move off the mutable cross and will lose their identity strictly as a personal material being and begin to understand their higher nature, which is not just calling on God to fulfill one's prayers, but understanding that God is immanent, that there is a higher nature within one. So, is this happening? It might be said, therefore, that the Great Invocation, as first given out, was for the use of those who are crucified upon the mutable cross, the cross of change, whilst the second invocation is for the use, and still is for the use, of those who are crucified upon the fixed cross, the cross of right orientation. And it will be interesting to see how he blends this. You know, the writings were given out at so many various times, and they were collected in ways which I think were not entirely sequential, maybe sometimes more by subject. There does seem to be in the externalization of the hierarchy a kind of sequential placement of the writings, and some of them occurred quite early, and some of them post-1945, and are therefore very important to reveal the plans that the hierarchy was newly making after the discovery of atomic energy and its use in the atomic bomb, which I think changed everything. So the second invocation is for the use of those who are crucified upon the fixed cross, the cross of right orientation. It is for the use of those men and women whose aim is the will to good. It's so important, isn't it, somehow, the will to good greater than the will to peace. What will to persist? So there is this will to peace, and it is the will in a way towards a peaceful condition, untroubled condition of the astral body, and there is the will contrasting with it for the greater good of the greatest number. So the second invocation more difficult. Those who think in terms of world service and who are oriented towards light, the light of knowledge, the light of wisdom and understanding, and the light of life itself. So very high orientations required of those who could with understanding use the second invocation. Even today we use it. We're in a period of world process where it must be used. Even today the forces of the Black Lodge are challenging humanity. The door where evil dwells was not entirely sealed after the Second World War, and these forces returned in more subtle form, and now the forms are taking even more blatant. There is a direct attack upon what humanity has salvaged from its centuries of painful experience, and this cannot be allowed to prevail. Upon the fixed cross, the united influence of four streams of energy, when expressing themselves fully through an individual disciple and through the hierarchy, produces three emerging conditions. So now we have the analysis of the fixed cross. As earlier he gave us important information on the mutable cross. He is really going over this in some detail. And it's always union, synthesis, the coming together and simultaneous expression of energies with which we are now dealing. So when these four streams of energy express themselves fully through the individual disciple and through the hierarchy, emerging conditions are produced, and there is a vast experience of group life, group activity, group awareness. The self-conscious man in Leo becomes group conscious man in Aquarius, and the groups, for good or for ill, have gathered and are now gathering. Everywhere around us, this group, that group, groups in law, groups in banks, scientific groups, environmental groups. We are very much in the entrance period to the age of Aquarius. We have passed the midway point of the overlap into the age of Aquarius, something of a 500-year period. By 2117 we will be solidly into that age, and we could begin to wonder about Francis Bacon, who was such a strong Aquarian, and his work in the early 17th century. Now we have the early 21st century. I think, we are dealing here with the overlap period. By the time we get to 2117, it will be 500 years approximately from the death of Francis Bacon, who died, if he died, the stories are abounding, in 1616. So that would have been the midway point for the fading out of the Piscean energy, would have been occurring around the time of the founding of the Theosophical Society. And the mounting of the Aquarian energy in greater strength would have been coming. And we're told that the energies of Pisces will completely have faded out at the end of this present 21st century. So by the time we are technically into the age of Aquarius, 2117, it will be simply Aquarian energy. We have to work out these overlaps, when certain energies fade out and when they are growing. I think there was much in the scientific era, beginning in 1775 and even earlier, that was impulse from Francis Bacon. It was a fifth-ray Aquarian impulse. He sounded the bell which, what does it say, drew the wits together. Those of mind came together and started the great scientific revolution. We had the Age of Enlightenment, followed by an age of real experimentation, gaining steam toward the end of the 18th century, 1775, when the fifth ray came in its ray cycle for humanity. So anyway, there is the group activity, and there, when these energies of the fixed cross, we have emerging conditions of the following nature. Vast group activity, we see it everywhere. Then there arises in the consciousness of the disciple a vision of the endless way, of which nirvana is but the beginning. And so we have seen a great consciousness movement, during the latter 20th century. We could ask, is it fading out now? Because he said the day of opportunity will not always be with us. Hopefully it is not fading out, because we need this kind of consciousness movement in order really to invoke the reappearance of the Christ, to prepare men's hearts and minds for that event. And then we have the third emergent effect. He recognizes his task of mediatorship, which is the major task of the hierarchy, mediating between Shambhala and humanity, and we can say that this is what the individual disciple recognizes. He knows that he must carry forward the dual task of invocation and evocation simultaneously. Well, he has to be ready for the invocation when it comes. The evocation through right invocation of the will to good of the world thinkers and aspirants, and also the will to save of the Shambhala lords, a great saviorship coming from that first ray source via the hierarchy, which he is in a position directly to approach. I touch here on grave mysteries. One thing about the Tibetan, he does not use unusual words casually. So deep issues having to do with life and death are involved here. A grave mystery which is one absolutely essential to the propagation of love and life. And without it, the consequences would be grave. Without the information from these mysteries, without an appreciation of them, there would be grave consequences, highly undesirable consequences. So the more advanced disciple, he can carry forth the dual task of invocation and evocation simultaneously. His task is to see to, via the Antakarana, the evocation of the will to good, of the world thinkers and aspirants. He is stimulated from above, and he can invoke Shambhala. He can also invoke the world thinkers, from whom will be evoked the will to good, and his higher type of invocation will evoke the will to save of the Shambhala Lord. So he has a heavy and constant responsibility between those whom his invocation can evoke. He is in a position to approach the hierarchy, not directly Shambhala. This is, remember, we are told that this fixed cross lasts even beyond the fourth initiation. We ran into that rather interesting idea because the cardinal cross influence is not confirmed until the 5th degree. So the power of the fixed cross is ongoing and extensive, and lasts even after the disruption of the causal body, even though the power of the cardinal cross is rapidly overtaking it. And this I explained by the fact that the soul ray is really the ray, one of the rays of the triad, and especially in its atmic division pertains to the master. So that quality of energy will be a subray of the monad, very powerful for a long time, even after one becomes an arhat. At least this is my sense of things. Well, okay, I think we have reached the point we have where we can say that this is the end of Esoteric Astrology Adventure number 140B, and we are on page 574, and we have the beginning of Esoteric Astrology Adventure number 140C on page 574. And we will go on with this important section dealing with the practical effects of the fixed cross, and how really it takes a man all the way to the stage of mastership. Sometimes it seems, from what the Tibetan says, that it would end at the third initiation, but it does not. It's only the possibility of the cardinal cross influence that begins. So, okay, we will go on shortly. See you then.